Good evening everyone, I am James Bayrante and we will discuss green laws together with other resource speakers, my fellow students in the School of Law. So bakit nga ba green? Basically because these environmental laws cover provisions for the forest and land-based natural resources and wildlife. Meron namang blue laws para sa mga yamang tubig at brown laws sa mga lupa. So I believe nowadays we are very preoccupied with the effects of this pandemic. But we need also to understand these environmental laws that will be very beneficial to our future and today. Tonight, we will discuss the following green laws. We have Revised Forestry Code, Philippine Mining Act and People's Small Mining Act, Chainsaw Act, Wildlife Resource Conservation and Protection Act, National Integrated Protected Air Systems or NEPA's Act. We have also National Caves and Caves Resources Management and Protection Act and their implementing agencies. We're back. So, allow me also to discuss one of the laws that protects the environment, which is the National Caves and Caves Resources. So basically, we need to understand what is the content of the caves and resources management protection. So we have legal basis. We also have what are cave and cave resources, what are the values of caves, what are the threats, prohibited acts, penalties, and how can one contribute in protecting cave. And also we have CPEO. So legal basis, Republic Act 9027 dated April 8, 2001 is the Philippine law for the protection of caves, otherwise known as the National Caves and Cave Resources Management and Protection Act. So we will have definition of terms here. So what does caves mean? Caves, any natural occurring void, cavity, recess of system of the interconnected passages beneath the surface of the earth. Then what about caves resources? Any material or substance occurring naturally in the caves. We have also speleology, relief features of the walls, ceilings, and floor of any caves or lava tube. We have also significant cave, refers to a cave which contains materials or possesses features that have archaeological, cultural, ecological, historical, and scientific value as determined by the DNR in coordination with the scientific community and academy. So we have values of cave in terms of cultural and historical, ecological, economic, and scientific. What are the values of caves? Historical. Historical caves are places of pride for the Filipino, having served as a refuge when they have fought to the Philippine independence against the Spanish government. Associated with turning points in the Philippine history, founding sites of historical important organization or associated with illustrious Filipino in the history. We have example of this. We have Mount Bulusan Cave in Sorsogon, where local Katipunero established their society. What are the values of caves? Potential benefits of ecotourism, diversification of opportunities, economic incentives, tool to educate the general public, develops pride to the place, preservation of natural cultural heritage. Note, a total of 167 caves were identified, however, only 7 were classified as one. So what about threats in the caves? We have pollution, quarrying, poaching, incompatible tourism, illegal logging, illegal water extraction, and vandalism. How can one contribute in protecting our caves? We need to coordinate your caving activities with the designated government agencies. We need to undertake the necessary caving skills, training, and preparations, and bring the necessary equipment appropriate of the cave you will enter. Report discovery of new caves in the DNR and other designated government agencies. volunteer in cave protection enforcement. And also we need to have officer training for this required before deputations. Then we also to participate in public conclusive meetings regarding cave management and protection. So under this law, we have the Section 4, which is implementing agency. The DNR shall be responsible agency to take implementation of the provisions of the Act in coordination with the Department of Tourism, the National Museum, the National Historical Institute, and concerned local government units or the LGUs for specific caves, except for in the province of Palawan. The Palawan Council is Sustainable Development shall be the one who will lead the implementing agency as to pursuant to Republic Act 7611. So we have deputation of cave protection enforcement officer. The RED shall deputize cave protection enforcement officers from locally based non-government agency, community organizations, indigenous people, and other volunteers who have undergone necessary training for the purposes. So the Philippine National Police, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the National Bureau of Investigation, and other enforcement agencies may be designated as a cave protection environment. So we have also the existing procedure of deputation shall be followed in the CPEOs shall be deputized for the period of 1 year and renewable thereafter depending on their performance. The deputized cave protection enforcement officer shall have the full authority to seize and arrest violence of the Act subject to existing laws and regulation of the arrest. So we have prohibited act under Section 7. We have knowingly destroying, disturbing, defacing, marrying, alternating, removing, or harming the spillage or speleothem or any cave alternating the free movement of any animal or plant life in or out of any cave. We have gathering, collecting, possessing, consuming, bartering, or exchanging or offering for sale without authority or any cave resources. And also we have counseling, procuring, soliciting, or employing any other person to violate any provision of the section. So what about penalties? Under Section 8, the penalties shall be punished by imprisonment of 2 years to 6 years or fine ranging from 20,000 to 500,000 or both at discretion of the court, provided that the person furnishing the capital to accomplish the acts punishable shall be ranging from 500,000 to 1 million or both at the discretion of the court. Furthermore, if that area requires rehabilitation and or restoration determined by the court, the offender shall also be required to restore the same whenever practical or compensate for the damage. Finally, that if the offender is a government employee, he or she likewise be removed from the office. So we have also administrative confiscation and conveyance. The Secretary of the or the concerned regional executive director shall order the seizure and confiscation in favor of the government, the gathered, collected, removed, possessed, or said cave resources, including the conveyance and equipment used in the violation of Section 7 of Republic Act 9072, as reproduced in Section 8 of this order. The procedure of the seizure, confiscation, and forfeiture of cave resources and all regulations such as but not limited to Section 4 and 5 of the Department Administrative Order Number 32-97. As to the implementing rules and regulations, the DNR shall, within 6 months from the effectivity of this act, issue rules, regulation necessary to implement provisions thereof. Good evening, we're back. Before I formally introduce the second speaker, to introduce her to the public, who is she? Kakamustahin ko muna siya. So, kamusta ka po ngayon sa College of Law?
Good evening, Sir James. So, I'm good naman po. Ikaw po, kamusta ka?
Medyo nakakapapa, pero I'm striving very hard naman. So, now we'll proceed to the topic that we need to discuss. I believe mahalaga tong topic na to para malaman ng tao at malaman ng mga kapwa nating kaklase sa College of Law. So, allow me to introduce Miss Princess Liable to discuss revised forest code. So, tell something about this topic.
So, the Presidential Decree number 705, which is the revised forestry codes, is more on the trees, more on the natural resources of our society.
So, I believe it talks about illegal logging,
yes,
right?
Yes, Sir James. It talks about illegal logging. So, first we will define illegal logging. So, according to Section 68 of this code, cutting, gathering, and or collecting timber or other forest products without license. So, any person who shall cut, gather, collect, remove timber or other forest products from any forest land or timber from alienable or disposable public land or from private land without any authority or possesses timber or other forest product without the legal documents as required under existing forest laws and regulations shall be punished.
So, what about the punishment that you want to share with us?
So, we have acts punishable by law. So, these are the first table. First is the cutting, gathering, collecting, removing. The second table shows the same, but its subject is different from the other table. So it is already posted, shown in the photo or television, so you could just check it.
Okay. So you kept on repeating this word timber. So can you define timber for us?
So a timber, Sir James, any piece of wood having an average diameter of at least 15 centimeters and at least 1.5 meters long, except all mangrove species, which in all cases shall be considered as timber regardless of its size.
Now we understand what timber means. So you also have square timber or lumber.
So a squared timber or a lumber is a timber squared with an axe or other similar mechanical hard tool in the forest, and which from the size of the piece and the character of the wood is obviously unfit for the use of wood in that form. Such timber should be invoiced or otherwise manufactured. If not, it should be assessed as manufactured timber.
What about forest products?
So, forest product is a timber or pulpwood, firewood, bark, treetop, rising, gum, wood, oil, honey, beeswax, nipa, rattan, or other forest growth such as grass, shrub, and flowering plants. The associated water is also included. The fish, the game, scenic, historical, recreational, and geologic resources in the forest lands.
Okay. So you have also mentioned about authority. So tell me about the authority, the definition of authority to this code.
So in forestry code, we have the definition of the authority, which means the authority is to cut, gather, collect, or remove timber or other forest products from any forest land, or timber from the alienable or disposable public land or from private land. It may be in the form of any license agreement or permit issued by the Secretary of the Dnr or by his duly authorized representatives.
Can you give examples of license or permits?
Yes, so we have examples of licenses or permits. which includes the first is the timber license agreement, second is the private land timber permit, the third is the special private land timber permit, the fourth is the gratuitous timber license, the next is the mangrove cutting permit, special cutting permit, and the last is the minor forest products license.
I believe there are a lot of license or permit that requires here. So, do you have special permits for this?
Yes, so we have examples of special permits. First is the permit to cut Nara and other premium hardwood in the forest areas, civil or military reservation or resettlement areas. So, it is also to permit to cut Nara and other premium hardwoods found in private lands.
What about legal documents required for the possession of timber or other forest products? Do you have that?
Yes, Sir James, we have that. We have the legal documents required in the possession of timber or other forest products. So it includes, first is the transplantation documents, which includes logs, lumber, and non-timber forest products. And the second one is the certificates of origin. The third is the certificate of transport agreement.
Do you have any idea who are the persons liable if they commit any disrespect to the forest?
So we have persons liable. First is the cutter, the gatherer, the collector, the remover, and the possessor or all persons who appear to be responsible for the commission of offense defined in the section 68 of this code. And lastly, in case of partnerships, associations, or corporations, the officers who order the cutting, gathering, collection, or possession will be liable.
So tell me about the penalty imposed on this.
So the penalties imposed in this code is the offender shall be punished with the penalties imposed under the Article 309 and 310 of the Revised Penal Code. Another one is the Article 309 of the Revised Penal Code, which prescribes the penalties for the crime of theft. And Article 310 defines the crime of qualified theft.
So you have actually enumerated here as we see in the screen.
Yeah, so we have the screen, the value, the penalty, and duration. So as you can see in the table, there are now more than 22,000, 12,000 up and the 22 up to 22,000, more than 6,000 to 12,000, and the 200 to 6,000. So these are the penalties and durations in the code.
Okay. Thank you for giving us enlightenment to that one.
So this is another one, another table.
So as I can see in the screen, we also have 5 pesos or less here.
So yes, we have 5 pesos or less, which has a duration of 2 years, 4 months, and 1 day to 6 years. In case the value does not exceed 5 pesos and the offender have acted under the impose of hunger, poverty, or the difficulty of carrying a livelihood for the support of himself or his family, the penalty imposable is arresto minor in its maximum period or 21 days to 30 days.
So any other offenses punishable under PD 705?
Yes, we have offenses punishable under the Presidential Decree number 705. So section 69, which is the unlawful occupation or destruction of forest lands and grazing lands. So these are the acts punishable and its penalties. We also have, Sir James, section 69. It is just a continuation of the previous slide. So these are the acts punished and its penalty. Provided further that the maximum penalty prescribed shall be imposed upon the offender who repeats the same offense. Double the maximum of the penalty upon the offender who commits the same offense for the third time.
We have also under section 70, right?
Yes, the pasturing livestock without authority. So that's the penalty and the acts punishable by it. So, Sir James, I will share to you also the section 71 of this code, which is the illegal occupation of national park system and recreation areas and vandalism therein. So these are the acts punishable and its penalty.
So 100 to 200 pesos. So.
Yes, Sir James. So by this, I thank you for watching and Let's help plant trees and help stop illegal logging.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mombasa, for giving us an enlightenment regarding this particular code, which is very beneficial to our lives. I believe that's all for her.
Thank you, Sir Dean.
We're back again. As we continue our discussion, our first speaker will discuss about Republic Act number 9175, also known as Chainsaw Act of 2002. Please welcome Ma'am Iris Buenaventura.
Good evening, and to our viewers. So I'm here to discuss about the Chainsaw Act of 2002. So what is Chainsaw Act of 2002? It is a policy of the state consistent with the Constitution to conserve, develop, and protect the forest resources under sustainable management. Under this act, the state shall pursue an aggressive forest protection program geared towards eliminating illegal logging and other forms of forest destruction which are being facilitated with the use of chainsaws.
So, would you like to dig deeper to define as what chainsaw is?
So we have two technical terms under this act. The first one is chainsaw. Chainsaw refers to any portable power saw or similar cutting implement rendered operative by an electric or internal combustion engine or similar means that may be used for but is not limited to the felling of trees or the cutting of timber. And we also have chainsaw dealer, which refers to a person, natural or juridical, engaged in the manufacture, importation, distribution, purchase, and or sale of chainsaws.
So tell us about a person authorized to manufacture or sell and import chainsaws.
Who are persons authorized to manufacture, sell, and import chainsaws? Chainsaws shall only be sold and or imported by manufacturers, dealers, and or private owners who are duly authorized by the DNR.
Who possesses or uses a chainsaw then?
Those who has a subsisting timber license agreement, production sharing agreement or similar agreements, or a private land timber permits. Or those who is an orchard and fruit tree farmer, is an industrial tree farmer, is a licensed wood processor, and the chainsaw shall be used for the cutting of timber that has been legally sold and applicant, and those persons who shall use the chainsaw for a legal purpose.
Can you tell us about the registration? Do you have a registration of this chainsaw?
Yes, it is required in order to use chainsaw, register it with the DNR. So, we register chainsaw. Within a period of 3 months from the effectivity hereof, all persons who own or otherwise in possession of chainsaws must register the same with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources through any of its Community Environment and Natural Resources Office, which shall issue the corresponding registration certificate or permit if it finds such persons to be qualified hereunder. Every permit to possess and or use a chainsaw for legitimate purpose shall be valid for 2 years upon issuance, provided that permits fruit tree farmers shall be valid for a period of 5 years upon issuance. The department shall be allowed to collect reasonable fees for the effective implementation of this act.
So, I believe we also have penalties for this if there are violations, right?
Yes, we have penalties for number of offenses. For the offense of selling, purchasing, reselling, transferring, distributing, or possessing a chainsaw without a proper permit, the penalty shall be imprisonment of 4 years, 2 months, and 1 day to 6 years, or a fine of not less than 15,000 pesos, but not more than 30,000 pesos, or both, and the chainsaws confiscated in favor of the government. For unlawful importation or manufacturing of chainsaw, the penalty shall be imprisonment of not less than 1 month or not more than 6 months, and a fine of not less than 1,000 pesos or more than 4,000 pesos. For tampering of engine serial number, The penalty shall be imprisonment of not less than 1 month, nor more than 6 months, and a fine of not less than 1,000 pesos, nor more than 4,000 pesos. For actual unlawful use of chainsaw, penalty is imprisonment of 6 years and 1 day to 8 years, or a fine of not less than 30,000 pesos, but not more than 50,000 pesos, or both, at the discretion of the court, without prejudice to being prosecuted for a separate offense that may have been simultaneously committed. The chainsaw unlawfully used shall be likewise confiscated in favor of the government.
So do you have any reward for those who can give info?
Yes. There is a reward for any person who voluntarily gives information leading to the recovery or confiscation of an unregistered chainsaw, and the conviction of person charged thereof shall be entitled to a reward equivalent to 20% of the value of the chainsaw.
So, do you have an idea who is authority of the DNR?
Under this act, the authority of the Secretary of the DNR is to effectively implement the provisions of this act. The Secretary shall issue the implementing rules and regulations within 90 days upon approval of this act. He shall likewise organize an office within the department to ensure the requirements imposed by this act may be complied with by qualified persons within the shortest possible time at the least possible expense. Also, the Secretary may revoke any certificate of registration or permit previously issued to a person found violating the provisions of this act or the rules and regulations issued pursuant thereto.
And also you have you can talk about Joint Congressional Oversight Committee.
So we have this Joint Congressional Oversight Committee. So what is this Joint Congressional Oversight Committee? Their duty is to monitor and oversee the implementation of this act, including the approval of the rules and regulations issued pursuant thereto. This is composed of chairpersons of the Senate Committee on the Environment and Natural Resources and the House Committee on Natural Resources and chairperson and co-chairperson. 5 members of each of the Senate and the House of Representatives who shall be designated by the Senate, President, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives as members, provided that 2 of the 5 senators and 2 of the 5 House members shall be nominated by the respective minority leaders of the Senate and the House of Representatives.
So that's the end of your discussion, ma'am. Thank you very much for that very fruitful information you have shared with us. Okay, we're back. So before we proceed to the next topic, we will have a rundown of the discussion that we have earlier. So we have talked about the National Caves and Caves Protection Management. We also have talked about the Forestry Code, and the last topic we had was the Chainsaw Act. These are actually very beneficial to us. Now, let's proceed to the next speaker. So, she will talk about the National Integrated Protected Area System, or the NIPAS Act, as amended. So, let's welcome Ma'am Julie Buenzadilla. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for the short.
Would you like to give us a brief discussion about this NIPAS Act?
Okay, so NIPAS Act, as shown in your screen, stands for the National Integrated Protected Areas System, or the NIPAS Act. Actually, it has also an amendment. So later we will know there is meron namang e-NIPAS Act, yung expanded NIPAS Act. So the first legal basis for this NIPAS Act is RA number 7586. So the NIPAS Act of 1992, and then in 2018, the expanded NIPAS Act was passed under RA number 11038. So dito naman, dati kinakategorize lang nila into 8 yung mga protected areas natin dito sa Philippines, doon sa NIPAS Act. However, pagdating sa expanded, Yung mga natural parks under those category, in-specify pa nila into 94. So, parang super specific na talaga, James. And then, second na medyo salient feature doon sa Expanded LIPAS Act, dati 8 lang or 9 lang ang prohibited acts na punishable. Pero pagdating ng E-LIPAS Act, naging 22. So, again, mas specific sila. Siguro, base din yun sa mga observations silang mga violations ng iba nating kaan. So, we first define what is NIPAS. So, as a system, this is the classification and administration of all designated protected areas to maintain essential ecological processes and life support systems, to preserve genetic diversity, to ensure sustainable use of resources found therein, and to maintain their natural conditions to the greatest extent possible. So as nabanggit ko na po earlier, ang mga salient features po ng E-NIPAS is the protected areas, ano ba yun, and then prohibited acts, so mas marami na, and then other salient features. Also dito rin merong mga amendments, and even new provisions and transitory provision. We first define protected areas, or PA. So these are identified portions of land and water set aside by reason of their unique physical and biological significance, managed to enhance biological diversity and protected against destructive human exploitation. So, dito meron tayong 8 categories under the First Republic Act. First is the strict nature reserve, second natural park, kung saan naging 94 in the E-NIPAS Act yung prohibited protected areas, I mean. Third is the natural monument. Fourth category is the wildlife sanctuary. Fifth is the protected landscapes and seascapes. Sixth category is the resource reserve. Seventh is the natural biotic areas, and the last is the other categories. So, habang nag-random na ako doon sa 94, kasi medyo marami-rami nga ito, James, I was amazed na 11 out of that 94 PAs are actually in our region. So, nasa Region 5. Baka most, if not all sa atin na napuntahan ng mga lugar na ito. First is the Mount Mayon National Park in Albay. Second is the Ticao-Burias Pass Protected Seascape, also in Albay, Masbate, and Sorsogon. Third is the Abasig-Matugdon Mananap Natural Biotic Area found in Cam Norte. And then 5 PAs in Camsur, which are Bicol Natural Park, Buhi Wildlife Sanctuary, Lagnoy Natural Biotic Area, Malabungot Protected Landscape, and the Mount Isarog Natural Park. But yung Mount Isarog natin, kasali pa na siya. And then 3 other PAs in the remaining provinces of Catanduanes, Masbate, and Sorsogon. Yun namang Catanduanes Natural Park, Bongsanglay Natural Park, and Bulusan Volcano Natural Park, respectively. Yan. So, as I mentioned kanina, in the first NIPAS Act, meron lang siyang na-prohibited acts. However, pagdating ng NIPAS Act noong 2008, biglang naging 22. Kasi medyo in-specify po ng ating legislators kung alin ba yung mga punishable acts. So, under this law, under the NIPAS Act, the prohibited acts were enumerated according to letters A to B. So, A is the poaching or yung illegal hunting or catching, killing, destroying, disturbing of any wildlife. Second is hunting, taking, collecting, or possessing of any wildlife or byproducts thereof. Third is the cutting, gathering, removing, or even collecting timber. Parang nadaanan to ni Miss Bombase earlier.
Forestry Code.
Yes. And then fourth is possessing or transporting outside the PA any timber, forest products, wildlife, or byproducts. Fifth is using and fishing or even harvesting gear and practices that destroys marine life and their habitats.
Okay.
Okay, so for those first five prohibited acts, yung corresponding penalty nila ay fine na 200,000 to 1 million pesos or 6 years of imprisonment or both. However, meron pang dagdag na damages.
Okay.
Kasi medyo mabigat-bigat po yung kumbaga violation yung sinabi natin. So to continue, ito naman yung mga susunod na acts ay walang damages pero pwedeng ma-penalize with fine or imprisonment. So letter F is the dumping, throwing, using or causing to be dumped of any toxic chemical. Letter G, operating any motorized conveyance without permit from the PAMB or the Protected Area Management Board. Letter H, altering, removing, destroying, or defacing boundary marks or signs. And then letter I, engaging in kaingin, causing forest fires. Alam mo ba ang kaingin, Sir James?
Yung parang you are producing charcoal. Tama ba? Kaingin? Sinusunog?
Sinusunog. Bigyan mo na lang siya. And then letter J is mutilating, defacing, destroying, excavating, vandalizing, damaging any objects of natural beauty. And then letter K is damaging road and trails. Letter L is the littering or depositing refuse or debris. Letter M is possessing or using plastic cups or explosive. Letter N is occupying or dwelling in any public land without clearance from the PAMB. So, dapat pala may clearance pag ganito. And then letter O, constructing, erecting, or maintaining any kind of structures, fence, or enclosures, conducting any business enterprise without the prior clearance again, from the PAMB, and even permit from the DNR. So, medyo similar po siya sa na-discuss ni Ms. Buenaventura. Kailangan rin may permit from the DNR. So, ito namang letters O hanggang B, medyo mas mabigat yung penalty dito. Fine is ranging from 1 million to 5 million pesos. And then, imprisonment naman ay 6 years to 12 years or both. So, kanina, 200,000 to 1 million, and then 1 to 6 years lang. Pero, pagdating po dito sa prohibited acts, O to B, magiging 1 million to 5 million, and 6 to 12 years na imprisonment. So, to continue, letter T is the undertaking mineral exploration or extraction. Letter Q is engaging in commercial or large-scale quarrying. Letter R is establishing or introducing exotic species. So ito naman sa exotic species, dito pumapasok yung tinatawag ng GMO or genetically modified objects. So siguro nakita na kayo sa market ng medyo mas malaking size ng prutas. Yun po ay mga pinag-aralan na produkto na in-introduce sa market. However, hindi po yun basta-basta dapat binibenta. Dapat pinag-aaralan po siya. Pumasa po siya. And the letter S is conducting bioprospecting without the PAMB clearance. And then letter T is prospecting, hunting, or otherwise locating hidden treasures. So ito naman hidden treasures, parang napagdaanan din natin ito sa property law under Attorney Mitch Mayor, who is our professor din dito po sa ating subject sa and Natural Resources Law. So ay mababasa sa Article 439 of the New Civil Code kung ano po ang definition ng hidden treasure. And as to ownership, makikita naman po ito sa Article 438. So basahin niyo na lang po. And then, the last two prohibited acts is the purchasing or selling, mortgaging or leasing lands or other portions of the protected area or PA covered by tenural instrument. And letter V, constructing any permanent structures within a 40-meter easement from the high water mark or issuing a permit thereof. Diyan naman po sa letter U, kung makikita niyo po is meron ditong tenural instrument. Ito naman po yung ini-issue para i-authorize na gamitin ang PA or protected area. However, maapektuhan yung status niya as a protected area. So may cases na gano'n, parang ina-allow nila na ma-utilize ko yung ano doon. Yan. So the other salient features, yan, napagdaan natin is the establishment of 94 PAs within the classification of National Park. And then second is the expansion of PAMB composition sa Protected Areas Management Board. And then the creation of PA Management Office. Fourth is the clarification on the Integrated PA Fund. So parang may revolving fund din siya, IPF in short. And then administration and management of the system with the DNR through EMB or the Environment Management Board. And then the designation of buffer zones with the DNR upon recommendation of PAMB. And the last salient features in the Mtsa Act are the recognition of existing local communities, townships, and town centers. Next is the recognition of territories and areas occupied and conserved by ICCs or IPs. So, ang ating mga kapatid na indigenous people. And then, allowing renewable energy development, granting of tax exemption, while the coverage of the prohibited acts, so from 9, naging 22 prohibited acts. And then, imposition of higher fines and penalties. So, dun po sa letters O to B, naging 1 million to 5 million. And then, the last, masabi natin salient feature is the administrative and criminal liabilities of our LGUs. So, siguro, i-rundown na lang po natin yung mga naging amendments po dito sa Mtsa Act. So, in Section 5, there is the establishment and the extent of this system, the NIPAS. And then, Section 11 is the PAMB. Parang nabanggit na po na siya ulit-ulit. And then, Section 12 is the Environmental Impact Assessment. Section 13 is the Ancestral Domains and Customary Rights. Section 14 is the Energy Resources. And the succeeding Section 15, Areas under the Management of Other Departments and Government Instrumentalities. Dito naman, nasabi rin po siyang expanded Mtsa Act kasi may mga bago rin na provisions. So, first is mas pinalawak or mas in-specify po yung powers and functions of the PAMB. Subsection po nito ay Section 11-B. Nandito naman po yung PAMO or the Protected Area Management Office. Section 22 is yung existing rights sa mga PAs natin. Section 23 is the tenured migrants and other PA occupants. Section 24 is the existing facilities within the PA as of pagkapasa po nitong Mtsa Act. And then Section 25 is the special uses within protected areas. So kung yung nabanggit ko po kanina na in some cases, inaalaw po na ma-utilize po yung ating PA. However, with corresponding permits and licenses. So dito naman sa special uses under Section 25, ang key provision po ito is the issuance of tenure instruments subject to compliance to ECC and payment of the corresponding user fee. And the last, second to the last, new provision is the roles of the LGUs or the local government units. So the LGUs within the PA shall participate in its management through representation in PAMB as provided for in this Act, and said LGUs may appropriate portions of their share from annual internal revenue allotment or yung pinatawag nilang IRA and other income for the use of the PA, provided that all funds directly coming from the LGUs shall be exempted from the 25% remittance requirement of the fund. The LGUs shall continue to impose and collect other fees which they have traditionally collected, provided that the LGUs shall not impose property tax on properties owned by the government, nor issue any tax declaration for areas covered by the protected area. The LGUs with territory inside the protected areas shall align their CLUPs or yung kanilang land plan, local development plans, disaster risk reduction management plans or yung DRRM plans, and other required plans according to the objectives of this protected area management. Okay, and then the last new provision is the reporting responsibility. So dapat na monitor din yung mga progress or kung may mga violations na note doon sa mga protected areas, etc. And then last is the transitory provision. So Ang pagkapasa po nitong Ilipas Act ng 2008, the DNR shall cease to issue instruments or yung tenure instruments that allow utilization of resources within the PA until the management plan has been put into effect. And as a rule, general rule is that the existing land or resource use permits shall be reviewed first and shall not be renewed. So that's all for our NIPAS or INIPAS Act, Sir James.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Julie. You have actually discussed it very in-depth, very specific, and very diverse. Actually, it covers some provisions and some of the penalties that you have mentioned earlier. Thank you very much, Ma'am, for that very wonderful. Now proceed to our last topic for our discussion tonight. So we will have Ma'am April come to discuss about wildlife. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, Sir James.
So tell us about this Republic Act 9147 about this wildlife.
Yes, generally Republic Act 9147 talks about or speaks about protection and conservation of natural resources and wildlife animals we have in the country. So it's, as we can see in the scope of this act, it covers the conservation and promotion of the wildlife species and their habitats to promote ecological balance and enhance biological diversity. So next is, it regulates the collection and trade of wildlife. And third, it also pursues, with due regard to national interest, the Philippine commitment to the International Convention protection of wildlife and their habitats. And the last one is the support in the form of initiating scientific studies on the conservation of biological diversity. So here, sir, we can see the background of the biodiversity we have in the Philippines. So we have 53,000 house species, and 15,000 are plant species, and 38,000 are animal species. So it is further classified into terrestrial wildlife, where 49% of which is endemic. So endemic means it can only be found and it only occurs to a specific territory in the country. So 207 are terrestrial mammals and 133 are endemic, 691 birds and 239 are endemic, 419 reptiles and 241 are endemic. We have 120 amphibians and 98 are endemic. So in the next slide, we can also see the marine species, which is composed of 1,000 species, 49% of which is endemic. And we also have the reef species, 107,000. And then we also have the fish species, 3,214, and 121 are endemic. So this is how massive and huge biodiversity in the Philippines is. So, as explained with the biodiversity, this RA 9147 covers all wildlife species found in the areas of the country. This includes those protected areas under Republic Act 7586 or the National Integrated Protected Areas System or the NIPAS Act, as discussed by Ma'am Julie a while ago, and the critical habitats in the country, and also specifically the exotic species which are subject to trade or are cultured, maintained, and or bred in capacity or propagated in the country. So next, when we speak of secretary in this act, we speak of two secretaries. These are the Secretary of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and the Department of Agriculture. So these two secretaries have their own scope in terms of implementing and regulating. So under the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, we have all terrestrial plants and animal species, including all turtles and turquoise and wetland species. So for the Department of Agriculture, we also have all the declared aquatic critical habitats and all the aquatic resources. So that is the scope of the DNR and the Department of Agriculture. So let's proceed with the conservation and protection of wildlife resources. So under this act, the provision provides that collection of wildlife is allowed. So it is not totally prohibited, Sir James. So however, there are certain requirements in order for a person or an entity to collect wildlife species. So here are some requirements. First is appropriate and acceptable wildlife collection techniques with at least or no detrimental effects to the existing wildlife populations and their habitats. So next is, when the collection is done by indigenous people, it must be only for the traditional use and not primarily for trade, which shall not cover the threatened species. So under Section 23 of this Act, it shall govern the collection of threatened species. So later I will discuss further with the collection of threatened species. So let's proceed with the conditions for a lawful possession of wildlife. So in order for a person or an entity to possess a wildlife, it must be able to prove financial and technical capability and facility to maintain said wildlife. So it's a requirement, Sir James, that you are financially and technically capable of maintaining or in possessing the wildlife. So another is that the source was not obtained in violation of 9147 or this act. So that means it must be obtained lawfully. So here is another provision, the local transport of wildlife, byproducts, and directives. So the requisites for this is it must not be prejudicial to the wildlife and public health. So next is when you import or export wildlife, the authorization by the Secretary or the designated representative subject to strict compliance with the provisions of this Act and rules and regulations promulgated. So there will still be requirements promulgated by the Secretary or any legal authorities which the exportation or importation must comply with. So the recipient of the wildlife is technically and financially capable to maintain it. So same with the collection or possession of wildlife. So in exportation and importation, so the one who will receive the imported or exported wildlife should also be technically and financially capable of maintaining such. Next provision is the introduction or restocking of endemic or indigenous wildlife. So it is only allowed for population enhancement or recovery purposes. So that means other purposes na hindi kasama dito, that means hindi siya lawful. So it needs prior clearance from the Secretary or the authorized representative. Same with the other acts we have discussed, that it needs authorization from the Secretary or any representative from the government. So another is the proposed introduction shall be subject to a scientific study which shall focus on the bioecology, and that the proponent shall also conduct public consultations with the concerned individuals or entities. So here it is emphasized that there must be a conduct of bioecology and the public consultation with the concerned individuals or entities. These concerned individuals or entities speaks of if involves the indigenous people in a specific area or the local government unit which will be involved in the activity. So next is the introduction of exotic wildlife. So when it is allowed. So it is allowed only when there is a clearance from the Secretary or the authorized representative. The specific prohibition in this activity is that it shall not be introduced into protected areas. So that means those protected areas are covered by Republic Act number 7586 and critical habitats under Section 25 of this Act. So the requirements for the introduction of the exotic wildlife is environmental impact study, and second is the informed consent of the local stakeholders. So the same with the requirement of the previous activity. So we also have the bioprospecting. So in bioprospecting, it is required that an execution of undertaking stipulating therein its compliance with and commitments to reasonable terms and conditions that may be imposed by the Secretary. So it is the Secretary who provides or who gives the requirements in order for lawful bioprospecting be allowed. So the requirements are informed consent. So informed consent of who? Those in the local areas or those who will be directly affected by the bioprospecting, and full disclosure of intent and scope. So this is very important for the information in the government as to the what the end purpose or the goal of this bioprospecting, and if the person or entity is a foreign entity, the active involvement of a local institution must be again be sought throughout the bioprospecting activity or throughout its execution. So next, another is there are specific requirements on scientific researches on wildlife. So it must not be for a commercial purpose. Execution of an undertaking or agreement with and issuance of gratuitous permits by the Secretary or the authorized representative. So it must be there must be a prior clearance from concerned bodies like the LGUs in that specific area. And if the person or the entity is foreign, the active involvement of a local institution is also required. So here another activity is biosafety. For those potentially harmful to man and the environment shall be reviewed in accordance with the biosafety guidelines, ensuring public welfare and the protection and conservation of wildlife and their habitats. So another activity is commercial breeding or propagation of wildlife resources. Also only allowed through the issuance of wildlife farm or culture permit, also issued by the Secretary concerned, and only progenies of wildlife raised as well as unproductive parent stock shall be utilized for trade. So commercial breeding operations for wildlife, whenever appropriate, shall be subject to an environment study impact. So it must comply with these requirements in order for it to be lawful. So another is the collection of an economically important species. So here, Sir James, it requires the assessment showing that the population of such species can still remain viable and capable of recovering its number. And next is with the schedule and volume of allowable harvest. So it must not be it must not be detrimental to the continuity of the life of the species the collection involves. So another requirement is whenever threatened species are concerned, it shall be prohibited except for scientific, educational or breeding and propagation purposes. So next, so here are the scientific authorities engaged in the management and the international trade in endangered species. Here is the POB, or Protected Areas and Wildlife Bureau of DNR. This is under DNR, which is concerned, which covers terrestrial resources. We also have the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, or BFAR, of the Department of Agriculture, which covers aquatic resources. The Palawan Council for Sustainable Development, or RA 7611, covering the province of Palawan, and then the Ecosystems Research and Development Bureau under the DNR, covering terrestrial species. So here, as we have mentioned, in the activities allowed to be lawful, a person or an entity must seek first a permit. So it must be issued by the secretary or any duly authorized representative. So what are these permits? These permits are wildlife farm or culture permit, which is for 3 to 5 years validity. Next is the wildlife collector's permit, which is valid for 1 to 3 years. Another is the gratuitous permit, which is only valid for 1 year. And then the local transport permit, which is valid for 1 month to 3 months. And last is the export, import, re-export permit, which is valid for 1 to 6 months. So these permits may be renewed subject to the guidelines issued by the appropriate agency and upon consultation with concerned groups. So
now we'll proceed to how the government, or what are the roles and responsibility of the government to ensure the protection of the threatened species. Would you like to give us some inputs about that?
Yes, actually, Sir James, the following slides will be discussing about the roles of the government and the requisites for the protection of the wildlife or the threatened species. First of which is the determination of threatened species. So the government or the secretary is tasked to establish a list of threatened species. The criteria for which is first is the present or the threatened destruction, modification, or curtailment of its habitats or range. Next is the overutilization for commercial, recreational, scientific, or educational purposes. And third is the inadequacy of existing regulatory mechanisms. And last is other natural man-made factors affecting the existence of wildlife. So, in order for a person or an entity to again collect this threatened wildlife, byproducts, and derivatives, these are the requirements for James. First, it is only allowed for scientific and breeding or propagation purposes. Next is only the accredited individuals or businesses, research, educational, or scientific entities shall be allowed to collect for conservation, breeding, or propagation purposes. So first requirement is it must be within the specified purpose, and next is there are only specified entities which are allowed to conduct such. So another is requirements for the conservation of breeding or propagation of threatened species. So here, as a general rule, it is encouraged in order to enhance its population in its natural habitat. However, there are requirements when it is for a commercial purpose. So first is, it must be proven effective breeding and captive management techniques of the species. And next is the commitment to undertake the commercial breeding in accordance with Section 17 of this Act, simultaneous with conservation breeding. So next is for the government in establishing, first is they establish the list of threatened species. So next is the establishment of the critical habitats. So critical habitats designated by the Secretary outside protected areas under Republic Act number 7586, where threatened species are found. So for the protection of the critical habitats, it must be in coordination with local government units and other concerned groups. Secretary may require by purchase, donation, or expropriation lands or interests therein, including the acquisition of use of right, establishment of easement, or other undertakings appropriate in protecting the critical habitat. So here are the prohibited acts under this act. So first is the killing and destroying wildlife species. So exemption only when one is allowed to kill and destroy wildlife species only when it is done as a part of religious rituals of established tribal groups and indigenous cultural communities. Another exception is when the wildlife is afflicted with an incurable communicable disease. And third is when it is deemed necessary to put an end to the misery suffered by the wildlife. So parang euthanasia to, Sir James, na when it is deemed necessary. And another exception is when it is done to prevent an imminent danger to the life or limb of the human being. And last one is when the wildlife is killed or destroyed after it has been used in authorized research or experiments. So, kailangan authorized yung research or experiment for the killing or destroying to be valid. So, next prohibited act is the inflicting injury which cripples and or impairs the reproductive system of the wildlife species. So, another is affecting any of the following acts in critical habitats. First is the dumping of waste products detrimental to wildlife. So, another is squatting or otherwise occupying any portion of the critical habitat. And next is the mineral exploration and or extraction, the burning, the logging, and of course the quarrying. Yeah, so another is the introduction, reintroduction, or restocking of wildlife resources. As I have mentioned previously, generally it is not allowed, but it is only allowed when you comply with certain requirements provided by the DNR Secretary. And another prohibited act is the trading of wildlife. We also have the collecting, hunting, or possessing wildlife, their byproducts and derivatives. Also the gathering or destroying of active nests, nest trees, host plants, and the like. And the maltreating and or inflicting of injuries not covered by the preceding paragraph. And of course, the transporting of wildlife. So as you can observe, all the prohibited activities were discussed previously. So those activities are in general prohibited. It can only be lawful when the requirements are met. So here are other provisions under this act: the Wildlife Management Fund, the deputation of wildlife enforcement officers, the establishment of National Wildlife Research Center, the Wildlife Rescue Center, and the creation of wildlife traffic monitoring units, and of course the exemption from taxes. So there are activities which an entity or an individual can be subject to exemption. And next is the flagship species, and of course the botanical gardens, zoological parks, and other similar establishments. So that would be all, Sir James.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that thorough discussion. We have learned a lot from this topic, especially in actually taking animals from the wildlife. You cannot easily get and transport it without the necessary requirements or issued by the certain authorities.
Yes, you are correct, Sir James.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am, and I hope to see you again in our next discussion. Thank you very much. That will be all. Topic that will be discussed by Ms. Mea Bursola. We have the Philippine Mining Act of 1995 and the People Small Scale Mining Act.
Good evening, everyone. I am Mea Bursola, and tonight we will tackle about the Philippine Mining Act of 1995 and the People Small Scale Mining Act. These are the laws that govern the mining acts in the Philippines, but we will only focus on Republic Act Number 7942 and Republic Act Number 7076. Mining in the Philippines plays a crucial role in the pursuit of industrial development. The industry both induces and supports economic growth by providing mineral resources that serve as raw materials for the manufacturing, construction, and utility sectors. It contributes foreign currency through the exports of mineral ore and other processed and semi-processed mineral products and provides employment to communities in far-flung areas where the only source of economic activity is mining operations. In addition, it is also a source of both direct and indirect tax revenues for government. Republic Act Number 7942 or the Philippine Mining Act of 1995 declares that all mineral resources in public and private lands within the territory and exclusive economic zone of the Republic of the Philippines are owned by the state. It shall be the responsibility of the state to promote the rational exploration, development, utilization, and conservation through the combined efforts of government and the private sector in order to enhance national growth in a way that effectively safeguards the environment and protect the rights of affected communities. It also governs the exploration, processing, and utilization of mineral resources in the Philippines. It is expected to protect the national interest by ensuring that the benefits from mining are shared with the government through the Mineral Production Sharing Agreement or the MPSA. It also allows 100% foreign ownership of mining projects through financial or technical assistance agreements and provides several incentives to encourage mining, such as a 4-year income tax holiday, tax and duty-free capital equipment, imports, value-added tax exemptions, and income tax deductions when operations are posting losses and accelerated depreciation. It also strengthens the role of local government units in mining projects, both as beneficiaries and as active participants in mineral resource management, consistent with the provisions of the Constitution and government policies on local autonomy and empowerment. It also fully recognizes the rights of indigenous people and cultural communities and respect for ancestral land and institutionalized stringent measures to ensure compliance of mining contractors and operators to internationally accepted standards of environmental management. On the other hand, the Republic Act Number 7076 declared that the state to promote, develop, protect, and rationalize viable small-scale mining activities in order to generate more employment opportunities and provide an equitable sharing of the nation's wealth and natural resources, giving due regard to existing rights as herein provided. These are the authorized government agencies to administer the mining activities here in our country. First is the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, exploration permits, mining agreements, Mines and Geosciences Bureau, National Management Bureau, Provincial or City Mining Regulatory Board. And these are the provisions that must be strictly observed as we follow the Republic Acts given. And the rights required to manage exploration. Exploration permits is an initial mode of acquiring mineral rights and gives the holder the right to conduct exploration for all minerals within a specified area of 6 years, extendable for another 2 years. And qualified person is any Filipino citizen of legal age and with capacity to contract for a corporation, partnership, association, or cooperative organized or authorized for the purpose of engaging in mining with technical and financial capability to undertake mineral resources development and duly registered in accordance with law at least 60% of the capital which is owned by Filipino citizen. Foreign corporation is qualified to hold EP, FTAA, or of NPP. And mining agreements agreements is exclusive for Philippine qualified persons required to grant a contractor the exclusive right to conduct mining operations and to extract all resources found in the contract area. It is classified into three. First is the MPSA, Co-Production Agreement, and Joint Venture Agreement. FPAAs is required for qualified persons, including foreign companies with technical and financial capability to undertake large-scale exploration, development, and utilization of mineral resources. And areas open to mining operations is subject to any existing rights or reservations and prior agreements of all parties. All mineral resources in public or private lands, including timber or forest lands as defined in existing laws, shall be open to mineral agreements or financial or technical assistance agreement applications. Any conflict that may arise under this provision shall be heard and resolved by the panel of arbitrators. And areas close to mining applications shall not be allowed in military and other government reservations except upon prior written clearance by the government agency concerned, and near or under public or private buildings, cemeteries, archaeological and historic sites, bridges, highways, waterways, railroads, reservoirs, dams, or other infrastructure projects, public or private works, including plantations or valuable crops, except upon written consent of the government agency or private entity concerned. And in areas covered by valid and existing mining rights, in areas expressly prohibited by law, in areas covered by small-scale miners as defined by law, unless with prior consent of the small-scale miners, in which case a royalty payment upon the utilization of minerals shall be agreed upon by the parties. Said royalty forming a trust fund for the socio-economic development of the community concerned and the old growth or virgin forest, proclaimed watershed forest reserves, wilderness areas, mangrove forests, mossy forests, national parks or provincial municipal forests, parks, green belts, game refuge, and bird sanctuaries as defined by law and in areas expressly prohibited under NEPAS or RA number 7586 and DA Order number 25, series of 1992, and other laws. And these are the maximum areas for exploration. Onshore in any one province for individuals, 20 blocks, and on the other hand, 200 blocks. And for the entire Philippines, for individuals, 40 blocks, and on the other hand, 400 blocks. And offshore beyond 500 meters from the mean low tide level, for individuals, we have 100 blocks, and on the other hand, 1,000 blocks. And maximum areas for mineral agreement, and in any one province, we have 10 blocks, and for partnerships, cooperatives, associations, or corporations, we have 100 blocks. And for the entire Philippines, for individuals, 20 blocks, and on the other hand, we have 200 blocks. And for offshore in the entire Philippines, for individuals, we have 50 blocks. And for partnerships, cooperatives, associations, or corporations, we have 500 blocks. And for the exclusive economic zone, a larger area to be determined by the Secretary. The maximum areas mentioned that a contractor may hold under a mineral agreement shall not include mining, quarry areas under operating agreements between the contractor and a claim owner, lessee, permittee, licensee entered into agreement, or the Presidential Decree number 463. And for the terms, we have a term not exceeding 25 years to start from the date of execution thereof, and renewable for another term not exceeding 25 years under the same terms and conditions thereof, without prejudice to changes mutually agreed upon by the parties. After the renewal period, the operation of the mine may be undertaken by the government or through a contractor. The contract of the operation of a mine shall be awarded to the highest bidder in a public bidding after due publication of the notice thereof, provided that the contractor shall have the right to equal the highest bid upon the reimbursement of all reasonable expenses of the highest bidder. And for the penal provisions, we have here for the false statements, 1. uh, upon conviction, be penalized by a fine of not exceeding 10,000 pesos, and for illegal explorations, a fine not exceeding 50,000 pesos, and for theft or minerals, imprisonment from 6 months to 6 years, or pay a fine from 10,000 pesos to 20,000 pesos, or both at the discretion of the appropriate court. In addition, we shall be liable to pay damages and compensation for the minerals removed, extracted, and disposed of, and for the destruction of mining structures, imprisonment for a period not to exceed 5 years, and shall, in addition, pay compensation for the damages which may have been caused thereby. For the willful damage to a mine, shall be punished upon conviction by the appropriate court by imprisonment not exceeding a period of 5 years, and pay the compensation for the damages caused thereby. For the violation of the terms and conditions of the environmental compliance certificate, shall suffer the penalty of imprisonment of 6 months to 6 years, or a fine of 50,000 pesos to 200,000 pesos, or both at the discretion of the court. For other violations, punishable with a fine not exceeding 5,000 pesos, and for the fines, the Secretary is authorized to charge fines for late or non-submission of reports in accordance with the implementing rules and regulations of this Act. And the future people's small-scale mining areas, the following lands, when suitable for small-scale mining, may be declared by the board as people's small-scale mining areas if the public lands not subject to any existing right, and the public lands covered by existing mining rights which are not active mining areas, and private lands subject to certain rights and conditions except those with substantial improvements or in a bona fide and regular use as a yard, stockyard, garden, plant nursery, plantation, cemetery or burial site, or land situated within 100 meters from such cemetery or burial site, water reservoir, or a separate parcel of land with an area of 10,000 square meters or less. The extent of contract area, the board shall determine the reasonable size and shape of the contract area following the meridional block system established under PD number 463 as amended, or otherwise known as the Mineral Resources Development Decree of 1974. But in no case shall the area exceed 20 hectares per contractor, and the depth of or length of the tunnel or not exceeding that recommended by the director, taking into account the following circumstances. First is the size of membership and capitalization of the cooperative, and the size of mineralized area, quantity of mineral deposits, safety of miners, environmental impact, and other considerations and other related circumstances. The terms and conditions of the contract. A contract shall have a term of 2 years, renewable subject to verification by the board for like periods as long as the contractor complies with the provisions set forth in this Act, and confers upon the contractor the right to mine within the contract area, provided that the holder of the small-scale mining contract shall have the following duties and obligations: to undertake mining activities only in accordance with the mining plan duly approved by the board, and to abide by the Mines and Geosciences Bureau and the small-scale mining safety rules and regulations, and to comply with these obligations to the holder of an existing mining right, and pay all taxes, royalties, or government production share as are now or may hereafter provided by law, and to comply with pertinent rules and regulations on environmental protection and conservation, particularly those on tree cutting, mineral processing, and pollution control, and to file under oath at the end of each month a detailed production and financial report to the board, and assume responsibility for the safety of persons working in the mines. And for the share of gold, all gold produced by small-scale miners in any mineral area shall be sold to the central bank or its duly authorized representatives, which shall buy it at prices competitive with those prevailing in the world market, regardless of volume or weight. The central bank shall establish as many buying stations in gold rush areas to fully service the requirements of the small-scale minerals thereat. The Provincial or City Mining Regulatory Board shall exercise the following powers and functions subject to review by the Secretary: to declare and segregate existing gold rush areas for small-scale mining, reserve future gold and other mining areas for small-scale mining, award contracts to small-scale miners, formulate and implement rules and regulations related to small-scale mining, settle disputes, conflicts, or litigations over conflicting claims within a people's small-scale mining area, an area that is declared a small mining, and perform such other functions as may be necessary to achieve the goals and objectives of this Act. And for the composition, the board shall be composed of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources representative as chairman, and the representative of the governor or city mayor as the representative of the governor or city mayor, as the case may be, one small-scale mining representative, one big-scale mining representative, and a representative from a non-government organization who shall come from an environmental group as members. The representatives from the private sector shall be nominated by their respective organizations and appointed by the Department Regional Director. The department shall provide the staff support to the board. And for the penal sanctions, violations of the provisions of this Act or of the rules and regulations issued pursuant hereto shall be penalized with imprisonment of not less than 6 months nor more than 6 years, and shall include the confiscation and seizure of equipment, tools, and instruments. And for the distribution of establishments with PE20 over by region, nickel mines are located in Zambales, Palawan, Agusan del Sur, Surigao del Norte, and Surigao del Sur, while the gold with silver mines are in Benguet, Masbate, Camarines Norte, Davao del Norte, and Agusan del Sur. The copper with gold and silver mines are located in Benguet, Cebu, and Zamboanga del Norte, while the copper mine with gold, silver, and zinc is in Albay, while the metallurgical chromite mines are in Surigao del Norte and Eastern Samar, and the iron mine is in Leyte. That is all for the Mining Acts of the Philippines. Thank you.
All of the acts that we have discussed. So we will be discussing the agencies tasked with the enforcement of environment laws, which actually tasked to Sir Jerry Bermudez. However, because of the events happening around us, he will not be present to our live discussion. But he provided us some slides to understand what agency task enforcement of environmental law means.
Enforcement. Agencies tasked with the enforcement of environment laws: Philippine National Police, Philippine Coast Guard, National Bureau of Investigation, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Department of Environment and Natural Resources. A. Environmental Management Bureau. B. Forest Management Bureau. C. Mines and Geosciences Bureau. D. Protected Areas and Wildlife Bureau. Department of Agriculture, Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources. Local Government Units. Department of Transportation and Communications. Department of Health. Procedure for law enforcement. Searches and seizures. A. Search as an incident to lawful arrest. B. Search of a moving vehicle. C. Seizure of evidence in plain view. D. Waiver of right. E. Stop and frisk. F. Exigent and emergency circumstances. Custody and disposition of seized items, equipment, paraphernalia, conveyances and instruments. Arrests. Environmental Ombudsman.
Thank you very much. We really understand what green law is all about. So tonight, we will end our discussion with a smile for having a good knowledge imparted to us by our resource speaker. Thank you very much.